Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending and joining us for yet another going to be a fabulous edition of our Zettabytes Today virtual lunch and learn. Um, this series was started at the beginning of this year. It came from, after conversations with a lot in our community. Our community is essentially comprises of, all the LGBTQ plus professionals in tech, data, and in design. And we, of course, welcome any straight allies who are very welcoming to our communities and to attend these sessions. Um, Today's speaker is going to be Stephanie Globus Reiser, and she is currently the Director of Sales and Analytics at Vertiv. I will let her tell her story. And when Stephanie and I first met, we kind of hit it off because we are both heavily invested in understanding data. And, data drives all my decisions. And I found another soulmate out there who her decisions are also driven completely by data and what the data is trying to say. With that, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you can put yourselves on mute, and also if you have questions as they come, please put your questions on the chat. Robin, I wanted to introduce also Robin Bauman. She is part of the leadership team, and Stephanie is actually one of our ambassadors, and so she has been promoting us, especially in the data world, quite a bit all of this year. So Robin and I will manage the chat thread, and also we are going to have a Q&A at the end. At that time, you can unmute yourself and ask questions directly. With that, Stephanie, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rini. And lovely to meet everybody. And in fact, I see people that I met at Data Connect, where I was an ambassador at one of the networking tables we had there. So lovely to meet people that I met in person for the first time then. And welcome to anyone that I haven't met yet. So good to see you, and thank you for coming to this. All right, my life has had a number of twists and turns since I agreed to this presentation. So there's the presentation as I thought it might be, maybe 6 months ago, and there's the presentation as it is now. And I'll just take you along the journey that I've had with this. So let me go ahead and share. All right, so the topic of the presentation, I believe we said, was modeling DEI impacts or something along those lines, using data to understand your DEI initiatives. And let me tell you a little bit about myself so that you know where I'm coming from along my journey. So the background, there's not a lot written here, right? If you look at me, just face value stuff, Reiser Globus, Director of Sales Data and Analytics at Vertiv. I've got a master's in mathematics. But like with many of us, what doesn't show there is a whole lot of behind the scenes story. So I've been at Vertiv roughly 6 months, which was, I joined Vertiv after I agreed to do this talk, which is part of the background story. And in addition to that master's in mathematics, what it doesn't tell you is that I've also been all but dissertation in 2 different related fields. So pure mathematics, but also operations research, and most of a master's in computer science as well. Sometimes when you're good at something, it takes a while to figure out what your path is in that area. So I always knew that I loved math. I loved STEM. I don't really love writing papers that I only expect 5 people in the world to read. And a part of what I've discovered in my more recent journey is that I don't always enjoy writing papers, period. I like working with the real world and working with the people and the data in it. And so I think one of the things that Rini and I bonded on when we met so long ago was the idea of data in the wild, and taking what is out there in the real world and doing something meaningful in the real world with it. And so let me back up a little bit to bring you up to speed on why I'm here on this topic today, which is that about 3 years ago. So, must have been 4 years ago because it was pre-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, there was a June in, let's say 2019, that sounds about right, when I needed a new Fitbit. And when I bought my Fitbit, I noticed that there were rainbow bands. And since I'm in the LGBTQ community, I thought, hey, a rainbow band, it's June, why not? Let me get one. And what I didn't realize was the impact that teeny tiny decision, inconsequential, it seemed at the time, the impact that teeny tiny decision would have on me. Because soon as I started wearing that band, people at work started coming up to me. Now, I worked at that time in a very conservative, very heavily, very homogenous working environment. And when people started coming up to me, they said, "So you're wearing a rainbow band?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's right." And I hadn't realized that how invisible I was to other people in the community at my workplace, or how closeted other people felt at work. And I've learned since then that it's incredibly common. Most recent surveys show that between 45 and 55% of us don't feel comfortable being out in the workplace, which is just sad. I certainly hadn't considered myself closeted, but I wasn't actively dating at the time. I had a teenage son who was going through health problems, and dating was the last thing on my mind at the time. So there weren't pictures of me and a partner or anything like that that would have brought the conversation up. It was when I started wearing, I'm still wearing it. I started wearing the rainbow wristband that suddenly I realized, hey, there are a lot of people in my company who are coming to me and both outing themselves to me in confidence, but also letting me know how much they appreciate um, having representation among the leadership. As I said, it was a very homogenous workforce. So the executive leadership was entirely white, entirely male, entirely straight, and married with stay-at-home wives. In fact, it was very homogenous. And I was at the level just below that, and one of the very few, just a very small handful of women at the company, and the only openly LGBTQ person. So as soon as I realized what a difference it made to other people that I be visible, the choice I had to make for myself was, okay, you know what, knowing that, I refuse to go backwards in time. It's important for me to continue to be visible. And realizing the weight of that, how uncomfortable uh, people at my company felt, and not feeling free to be their true selves, it caused me to poke harder at the company that I was at the leadership, and go, okay, what can we do? I realize we're in a very conservative industry. I realize that the customers who come to us are very conservative, but what can we do to better support our employees? And what I didn't realize at the time, but later came to realize, all right, it's not just some of this. I knew it wasn't just LGBTQ plus, it was also skin color. There was a need to support people of different skin colors at the company. It was also gender, the very, when you're in the middle, sometimes it's hard to see how much of a statistic you are, but I became aware as I was going through of increasingly gendered feedback and situations that I was in, and the lack of support I had for even being a woman in leadership, much less a LGBTQ woman in leadership at the company I was at. So all of that came together, and eventually I said, you know what, if this leadership just isn't willing to change, then I need to do something different, and I need to support a leadership that is willing. So that caused me to leave the position I was at in November last year. And then I went through I had guidelines for my exercise. I said, all right, I'm going to take 3 months. During those 3 months, I went to do a road trip out east to see what things are like out there. I want to do a trip out west to visit friends and family, and see what life out west would be like. I want to consider very broadly all my career options and what I really want to do. And I also started doing a lot of research, because I said, all right, this lack of support for being a woman, this lack of support for being LGBTQ, the lack of support that I could see, even though I was on the privileged side of it, for people of color at my former workplace. That's important to me. I want to do something with that, whether that is at a leader at another corporation, or I have the ability to be a backer of DEI initiatives and help move them forward, or um, or through community like Zettabytes, where, it was a result of that soul searching that I found Zettabytes and where I became an ambassador. And I highly encourage anyone, if you appreciate Zettabytes, then, this is me putting a plug in, please consider helping out at our events. Please consider chipping in. I do think it's important that there be a visible LGBTQ tech community. I'm proud to be a part of it. And we could really use support from everyone who's out there who does appreciate that this community exists. All right, I put in the plug. But one other thing that I did as a part of that soul searching, and okay, what next steps do I want to take? Given that I've always been good at math, I'm happy and comfortable in the data world. I started reading the research on, okay, what are the stats about gender? What are the stats about LGBTQ plus? What are the realities? What do the studies say? And the very first paper that I ran across, and here's where we're going to intentionally go out of order in the resources, but this is Meritocracy a Myth paper, was one of the very first ones I ran across when I said, okay, what does the academic research have to say about any group of people that it's in a non-privileged position in the workforce? And so I ran across this model, and here I am going backwards to the presentation, but that's okay, we'll catch up. And they had this incredible model of, all right, here are all of the things that we've seen through various studies, through various research efforts that contribute to social inequity in the workplace. And as I'm reading through this paper, I go, well, crud, I can identify with every single one of these things. I read the description and I go, oh, yeah, you know what? I experienced that. Oh, yeah, that is exactly what happened. And as I'm reading the paper, I also go, you know what? This paper would be so much better if the authors had some simulation showing the impacts of these different effects and bringing it together quantitatively instead of qualitatively. And so on a whim, I reached out to, well, not on a whim, right? I was intentionally exploring the space. What are all the possibilities available to me? And I reached out to the primary author on the paper, who was intrigued enough by my email to hop on a call with me, and intrigued enough to put me in contact with the other authors of the paper. And they were intrigued with me to meet and start talking through this. But this was just one of the options that I was considering. And it's an option that still is calling to me, in that this is an underserved area. So I came out of all of my soul searching, all the research, with there is a need to better support both organizational research community, the academic community, and the day-to-day people working in HR or across a business who are trying to support diversity, equity, and inclusion with better quantitative tools. Make it easy to quantify the impacts of, hey, if I want to provide a mentoring service to people of color at my organization, or to women at my organization, or LGBTQ, or whatever the initiative is that you think might have an impact. All right, let's estimate that impact is, and make it real for both the immediate communities that we're serving, the business partners that we're working with, and the leadership at our companies. So now I'm going to take it back in order, go back to where we were. And here's the thing: when you're modeling something like this, all models are wrong. Absolutely, 100%. You can't poke at any single model and have it be correct. But some are useful. So what are some useful characteristics of models when I think about modeling? Well, I really think about modeling. If you have a good model building exercise, that's a collaboration between the person who's actually doing the math, whether it's the coding or the mathematical modeling, and the decision makers. Like, what impact do you think you might achieve? Can you move the dial 10%? How does that impact translate into business outcomes? What are some business outcomes that you might see? You know, might you see an increase in customer base? Might you see an increase in wallet share as a result of what you're doing? Some of the easier ones that you might be able to get your hands on are, you know, the retention rates. And even those can be very challenging to get. My experience is that HR departments tend to keep their data very siloed and often for very good reason, right? But if we want to move things forward, how do we know we're moving forward unless we actually look at the data that tells us whether or not we're making headway? So, you know, can we say that, hey, we think we might be able to get individuals to be 10% more likely to stay, and then can we model what we think that that would do to the business and see whether or not we're able to drive those outcomes? You know, let's try it. Let's give it a shot. Models also can allow us to use assumptions that allow us to go beyond what our current state is and think about what could be. So if, you know, I'm in a very male-centric area, and it's gone backwards. You know, this is the discouraging fact. We've gone backwards. In 2019, statistics were that 1 in 4 people in data science, my home field, was female. You know, in 2022, the most recent statistic I saw that it had gone down to 1 in 5. So we're losing ground. But at least we have the data that tells us we're losing ground, because when I talk to people, often what I hear when I rattle off that stat is surprise. It's like, really? I thought we were getting better. You know, really? Are women dropping out of the workforce that much? What's happening? And, you know, as anyone in the area knows, there are all sorts of reasons that can come together to produce this result. But if all we focus on, so many efforts are focused on hiring. If all we focus on is hiring, we miss the embedded biases in the organizational constructs that we have. So if we could hire 50% women at entry level, what do we think that would look like with what our organizations currently look like? And when you look at retention and promotion rates, I think that what you would find across most organizations, and we could absolutely model that, is that even if you hired today 50% in my field at entry level, within 5, 10, 20 years, the distribution at the very top would look very different than it looks today, which is, again, very homogenous, not diverse, not reflecting the wider community. If we retain our LGBTQ plus workforce just 10% longer than the current average, what benefits would we see? What would we save in terms of the costs of transition, lost workforce time? And the other advantage to modeling is that when you have a stochastic model, and that just means you're incorporating uncertainty into it, you see ranges of potential outcomes rather than just point estimates. So, you know what? I confess, when I'm lazy, when I'm putting together a quick case for something, I'll absolutely do point estimates out there. When I was putting the case together for an employee resource group at my current organization, I said, all right, we've got in the US 5,000 employees, of which somewhere between 700 and 1,000 are LGBTQ, whether we know it or not, based on the ranges out there. And did point estimates based on that. But being able to put something complex together and see how those ranges evolve as you add in factors can be incredibly illuminating. So, fun fact from one of the reports that I read as a part of this whole journey, LGBTQ plus women who are open about their sexuality at work are half as likely to plan to leave their current employer in the next year compared with their closeted peers, and a third more likely to plan to stay for 5 years or more. So 51% that are open planning to stay for 5 years or more versus 38% that are closeted. You know, if I'm just doing the numbers for my current corporation, I said, what? Okay, between 700 and 1,000 are gay. So let's say 350 to 500 of those are women. Based on what I'm seeing, very few people at my company are comfortable at the moment being out. So, you know, I think there's a high closeted rate. You know, and if we have that ability to show that this corporation is willing to embrace all of its employees to support us in our diversity, you know, that's a real potential there in terms of savings for the company, being able to build on that subject matter expertise and business acumen that comes with having someone for at least 5 years. So those are stats that are out there that we can work with. And then how would we work with those? Well, here's one of my favorite, if you have to do something fast and you need a result, Monte Carlo simulation for the win. In fact, if you're on a desert island and suddenly you forget the value of pi, what I have up there in that, in these graphics are an example of how this technique gets applied to, well, it's often taught in the classroom through how you can estimate pi by throwing dots in a unit square. And on my way, I was thinking, you know, actually that would be a fun math cooking exercise. If any of you ever make biscuits with kids and you want to suddenly turn it into a math experiment, cut a biscuit out, cut the square out around it, and then weigh both the biscuit dough itself and the biscuit dough with the edges that remain from the square. And what you're doing is you are getting at the heart of what is pi through that experiment, because the radius of this circle would be pi r squared. The area of the square would be r squared. So if you just divide the area of the circle as estimated by your weight of dough by the area of the square, you get exactly that ratio of pi. And Monte Carlo simulation in general is exactly that. It's tabletop gaming, but for the purpose of coming to some sort of real world conclusion. So you create assumption for how a system works using distributions for the input. You say a person on average is 15% likely to leave in any given year. You play it out, you repeat over years. You say women have a factor of one, you know, have a 50% chance of being promoted in the next year. Men have a 60% chance, you know, whatever the distributions are that you come up with. They could be normal distributions, they could be triangular distributions, but you play it out, you repeat many times. And as you do these iterations, as you do it over and over again, you gain a sense for how the variables, you can actually do a design of experiments on this, get a sense for how the variables wind up impacting the results at the end. And you get results that you can take back to business partners that have meaning for them. So one of the things that I've done where a team was like, how in the world can we do this? Was in setting demand forecast accuracy targets for a team that was in charge of demand forecasting. And demand forecasting in any given year can be all over the place depending on the factors that impact your demand. But the challenge I gave them was, okay, give me your hard days and tell me what the hard days distribution is. Give me the days that you can usually expect to be easy and what their distribution is. Let's just set up 4 categories of days, see what that looks like in a normal year, how those ranges of forecast accuracy vary based on whether it's a easy day, hard day, very hard day, and then look at how many days you have in each of those easy, medium, hard, very hard buckets in the coming year. And then you tell me, based on that, you know, run some simulations, tell me what you think a reasonable forecast accuracy target is. And the wonderful thing about that is that when they come back, they've got buy-in on their target. Like, okay, I understand where this target came from because I understand the assumptions that went into it. And I weighed in on what those distributions would look like. You can estimate risk. So simulation is used in cybersecurity all over the place in terms of, well, if this kind of attack happens, and in general, we're able to block this percentage of them, and they're associated with these ranges of adverse outcomes, do we pay for an additional firewall? Do we invest in training? You can come up with assumptions that describe the impacts that each of those might be expected to have on the outcome, and decide where you're going to put your money based on which corrections are likely to lead to the right out, or to lead to positive outcomes for you. Modeling individual behavior is another great case for Monte Carlo simulation. And the other nice thing I love about Monte Carlo is you don't need any fancy tools. You don't need chat GPT. You don't need any other AI. In the background, some of those may be doing simulations. Don't know, don't care, doesn't matter. If you have Excel, if you have dough that you're making biscuits with, if you have Python or R or any kind of programming language. I've done Monte Carlo simulations using VBA in Excel, but you don't even have to use VBA. You can just use formulas in Excel to do this. It's an incredibly flexible technique, which makes it perfectly suited to diversity, equity, and inclusion questions. So as I was going through my soul searching, and now you've heard, I'm a director of data and analytics at Vertiv. So I've gone back into the corporate world. But what lured me into the corporate world was coming into an organization that was willing to invest in its employees and willing to take a different stance than what it had known historically, and willing to invite change. So one of the things I'm very excited about in my current role is, not only do I have a great day job, but I also have the ability to create an employee resource group at my current organization. And so just today, I sent out what we think the application content will be to the executive leader who's going to be our sponsor. And we're expecting next week or within the next week or two after that, the employee resource group application process to be officially announced and open. And we're ready to go with the founding set. And we've talked through, okay, here are the statistics we want to try and track, and here's what we want to do with them, and how we want to measure what progress we're able to make or not make, how we want to make sure that we're reflecting the needs of our community, both the LGBTQ members and the allied communities. But at the back of my head, so I'm very excited about the role that I have ahead of me, but at the back of my head is one of the alternate realities that played out in my mind, where instead, what I might be doing instead of being in this role is implementing this vision that I've put here. So what if we had an open source package supporting DEI business case modeling? And so I know I put in a plug for Zettabytes, but I'm also going to put in a plug for this, because what I would really love would be for this to be a community-driven, open source, crowdsourced resource for us. Let us help ourselves. We are in tech. We are LGBTQ. We have, if you're male, I guarantee you have friends that are female. If you're white, I guarantee you have friends with more melanin in their skin. If you're a straight ally, hey, you're showing up here. So you are already supportive of the LGBT community. But let us help not just ourselves, but everyone who is in that DEI spectrum and in an underrepresented group, needing both that additional representation and the organizational support in order to create better parity, to get us closer to equity. And it is so hard with the unconscious bias that is out there. I've seen numerous examples since I started doing this research where, sadly, we think the world is better off than it is. And as a result, we're not taking the actions that we need to actually make it better. And then we turn around and we're all surprised. Hey, wait, I thought we were on a good path. I thought we were going somewhere. For example, I hear a lot of people talk about how the millennials and Gen Z will really change things. And one of the sad statistics I've seen is that unfortunately, millennials and Gen Z test out with many of the same unconscious biases that the older generations have. So if millennials and Gen Z also think that once they are in power, then everything will be better and will be an equitable society, the data tends to say otherwise. So, this is a wake up in terms of let's put the tools out there that we can use to measure what's actually happening, to ground ourselves in reality, and not just feel good about what we're doing, but also know that we're driving the right results. Another thing that I just have to mention along those lines, as part of my whole research and onboarding, I did a certificate out of Cornell in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as part of that, I did a case study where I looked at 3 different websites and 3 different sets of Glassdoor reviews for roughly comparable companies. I looked at Deloitte, I looked at Accenture, and I looked at Infosys, all large tech companies. And when I looked at the websites, what I saw was that Deloitte had very strongly worded, beautiful websites telling about everything they're doing to be more equitable and how strongly they feel about being diverse and equitable and inclusive. Accenture's wording was more mild. Infosys had very little. They pretty much started and stopped at we're an equal opportunity employer. So, okay. When I looked at the Glassdoor reviews, people at Deloitte felt great about themselves. They said, hey, we are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Awesome, go Deloitte. Accenture people said, we feel okay about Accenture. Infosys people said, Infosys doesn't care. We don't think they're really doing much either. But then when you looked at the actual results and you thought about what you have the ability at Glassdoor to filter things to, okay, what does this look like by gender? What does this look like by ethnicity? What does this look like by handicapped or people with disabilities, people without disabilities? What does this look like LGBTQ versus not? And across every demographic where there were enough people to report, Accenture actually had the closest parity, then Deloitte, then Infosys. So let's just take Infosys out of the running. They weren't trying, they didn't succeed. They're their own thing. But between Deloitte and Accenture, Deloitte had the strong wording. Deloitte's people said, yeah, we feel good about it. But when you looked at the metrics, Accenture was doing better. Accenture was the one who was actually providing more comparable experiences to men versus women, to LGBTQ versus straight, to Caucasian versus non-Caucasian. And if we had easier access to what the impacts of mitigation strategies might be, we could make more informed decisions about what will actually move us forward towards better equity than just feeling good. There's a whole lot of we're doing things and we feel good about them. We're marching, we've got a pride shirt. Not so much that gives us good hard evidence that we're making progress in terms of representation at the highest levels, and through all the levels leading up to the highest levels, and
Hey, Stephanie.
equitable pay. No, thank you. Yes, we are almost out of time. So
Well, wait,
I want to
hang on.
put in a pitch for this. So
Okay.
if anybody wants to contribute, please reach out. Please do. And thank you for your time today.
Well, let me ask, there are several questions. So,
Yeah.
I just wanted to start off by saying I'm not surprised to hear some of the results that you saw with respect to Glassdoor and, the sets of companies that you had, that Accenture was doing better. because I think there is a tremendous amount of noise in the data, especially with respect to Glassdoor reviews. I mean, there's a automatic bias because the people who want to complain are the ones who are going into Glassdoor. So that said, I'll let Lashandra had a question. She put it on chat too. So Lashandra, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, I'll ask it. So thank you so much, Rini, and thank you, Stephanie, for that. I love the conversation around data because I know how important data is, especially when it comes to metrics and getting people to make some moves once they actually see it. But my question was more around how, in your personal opinion or in your lived experiences, how do you navigate it when you have the data, you've presented the data, but yet you get this apathy from those in power to actually make change? I mean, we've clearly seen this a lot in governmental entities. Let's just say issue one, for example. But I mean, like, so what would you give as advice on how to navigate some of that?
Well, the sad solution, the depressing solution that I came up with was to work with the willing. And one of the reasons that I went away, as near and dear as data is to my heart, I wound up putting that on hold because I thought I could achieve more as a leader in an organization that was willing than in trying to convince people through data who were all. I interviewed a number of people, and what I heard over and over again was, yep, there's data. Pretty much the executive leaders are either on board or not. And if they're not, maybe they get on board when they have children, family members, relatives, etc., whose experiences matter to them, who experience things in the workplace. But I talked to very few people who felt like they had actually gotten through to anyone at a high level using data. I've heard some results from people who were able to, and really it required the allies, the people could hear from tended to look much like them. And so that was interviewing all of those people, hearing all the stories is part of what inspired me to, okay, I'm going to go somewhere that's willing and I'm going to see what I can do to make a difference there rather than trying to convince someone who's not. So that's horrible. And as a math person, one of the systems that I see playing out is that, all right, in 20, 30 years, the people who are leaders now, that's when their daughters, their children will be, at the same level of career that I'm at now. And that's when they'll be hearing what would be my words, but in the voices of their children, their daughters. And at that point, it will be too late. And there will be, they will be out of the game. They will no longer be the leaders and the decision makers. Instead, there will be a new cadre of leaders and decision makers who will look very much like the ones ahead of them, unless we're able to make a difference. So my strategy has become concentrate the power in making businesses that are willing successful, and throwing my personal energy behind, okay, if I see a business that's willing, let me do what I can to help them out and help them past a hard spot. And you know what, the businesses that are not, I've made my choice and I've moved on. That's not the answer that's very helpful, but I'm not sure there is a data answer to your question.
Lashandra, what was your question about the government entities?
Well, my point around that is that, let's just say, for example, we know that gerrymandering and redlining is illegal. The Constitution has said it's illegal. Ohio has said it's illegal, but yet the government, our Congress, has not changed how it's done.
Mhm.
Right. So you have data, you have things that said this is wrong or this needs to be adjusted, and they refuse to do it. So
Mhm.
that's where I'm coming from. Oh, not just government, but I've seen companies do it too, just in my
Right.
consulting, just companies. So I was just curious just to hear other people's perspectives, particularly Stephanie or anybody, honestly, how to navigate that, because I mean, it causes so many problems. And there's a part of me that, you know, I've been navigating in this Black body for 50 years, and knowing that I've had to adjust so much of who I am to survive. And I don't want to survive anymore. I want to thrive, and I want people, all people, to thrive. So how do you help shift some of that power dynamic of people who don't want status quo to change because they've been benefiting from it, to allow more people to have access to the opportunities they need for success in life?
If I may answer that some of that question, in my experience, I've been sort of involved with DEI. It wasn't called DEI, going back to 25 years ago. And I agree with Stephanie with, focusing on the people who are willing. But I think the most success that I've got in that conversation with C-suite is if you make it a customer-based request. So if you think about what happened with LGBTQ community with constitutional marriage amendment in 2006, when they actually never implemented it. I mean, it passed as a ballot initiative, and then the day before the election, every major employer started giving domestic partner benefits in Ohio. And it was never, there was this grandfather clause. And part of the reason that happened was the basic demand was that you will lose good employees to other states and customers will stop coming. So if you can make the argument that, the value of DEI is because you're increasing your customer base, I think that revenue top line demand of that is probably the biggest driver than the bottom line driver of employees and what people make difference. So a lot of the business case has to, in my experience, has been always make it as a top line request on the business case as opposed to just focusing on employees.
Yep. No, I've seen exactly that, and that's what I've looked at both internally and external. But it's so interesting. Some companies, they honestly just don't care, and I agree with you. But I mean, I think one of the biggest things we can do as consumers is to say we're shopping with our dollars, or voting with our
Exactly.
dollars. How we show up like that, and how do we get consensus around that?
Any other questions?
So another thing along those lines is that, and Rini, I know I sent you this paper, and you and I haven't had a chance to talk about it since for me to get your take, but the paper about job seekers, and that job seekers do prefer employers that disclose their demographics, but if employers disclose, this particular one was about gender, but we can think about what it might say for other things. If a company A discloses that it is slightly less, that it is less biased than company B, that even women will be neutral between the two companies, and men will actively prefer the more biased company, the one that shows the more biased demographics. And it doesn't surprise me that men prefer the more biased ones, but it does surprise me that women would look at biased demographics and choose that company over one that was less biased. And I think that we as employees need to think about our agency and about supporting those companies that are less biased. Hey, Dhruva.
Questions?
I saw a hand up from Dhruva.
Okay. Drew, can you ask the question?
Me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You couldn't hear me before. I was asking. Yeah, thanks, Steph. I was wondering if there's age demographics around that. Like you were talking about the gender, and I wonder if because I feel like the younger generations, I'm seeing that they are more, you know, they do take that into consideration more.
I know that I saw that the statistics by generation for LGBTQ identification are pretty crazy. You know, it's something like 2% of boomers identify um, as LGBTQ plus. You get to Gen X, it's something like 4%. By the time, and then it just leaps up. So the millennials or something, I don't remember exactly, more like 10 or 12%. But then Gen Z was all the way up at almost 20% identification. So there are definitely high generational variances, but what I've seen with the unconscious bias gives me pause. All right, you know, there's room in some demographics, progress in some demographics, but not in others. I'm just concerned that as a whole, we're a bit too rosy about the impacts that we'll see from Gen Z eventually coming into power.
Thank you.
Hey, Stephanie, on that issue, I mean, this is something that I've, sort of maintained that, human beings don't exactly evolve that fast or like any other animal, plant, or anything else. It takes, hundreds and thousands of years. What evolves is our understanding of humanity. And with that, the laws and the policies that impact. So going back to Lashandra's point about the government entities, not giving the adequate protections, I think that is where data can be very useful. uh, Frustrating if they don't react to it, but data can be very useful because we can get the protections and use it more from a legal standpoint. But I don't think there is on average, going back to your unconscious bias thing, I think most people see the extreme sides, like they're great people in every generation. I mean, we are living the history of the boomers, who did bring about freedom to a lot of us. And we but that doesn't mean that on average the boomers were worse off than on average the Gen Z will be, right? I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you. And I think most people need to understand that it is policies and laws that make the difference, as far as who is going to step in and make the difference out there.
Well, there is one point in that where you and I disagree, Rini, which is that I see that policy in covering the most egregious examples. And, I'm very glad that we have policies and laws in place to handle egregious discrimination. Whether or not they effectively do, I like to think that we're better off because they exist.
Right.
But then there's also this whole world of, if it's not covered by law, then there's no ethical, moral reason to change it. And
I
a
mean,
lot of work needs to be done there.
yeah, that's like, boiling the ocean. So, if you're expecting to do that in our respective companies, I mean, that's a lot. But yes, I agree with you that we disagree. I mean, I actually agree with you. I don't see a disagreement there. Any other questions? Well, everyone, this was absolutely fabulous. I appreciate. Josh, did you have a question? I'm sorry. Joshua?
No, I was just saying thank you.
Okay, thank you. Um, Thank you all for attending. Our next session, I think, is right after Labor Day in September. We are going. If any of you want to, present on a topic, please reach out to Robin or May, and we will set you up. We are now looking at dates starting, I think, end of February, beginning of March of next year. We have pretty much all our slots taken up until like February. So as you come up with topics or you want to hear from somebody, please let me know, and we will set up these things. Also, one quick thing, this recording, the reason we do the recording is we have a private YouTube channel, so we will set it up there. If you register for any of the sessions and are unable to attend, you can always go back and look at that YouTube channel. Stephanie, I know you had a whole list of resources that you wanted to put in the chat. Go ahead and do that, but also send it to me so that I can put it in the descriptor for the YouTube channel and any of the promos that we do, so that it goes in there. Those of you who are not a Zeta Star, please become a Zeta Star. When we have in-person events, your first beverage is free on us. You get a T-shirt, and also in addition to that, you get some mentoring and you get an exclusive Slack channel out of that. So do join us, and thank you again. Go enjoy the rest of the day. We are giving back 5 minutes of your time, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Robin, if you would